He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow.
Wow. That's a powerful, profoundly challenging quote, isn't it?
It really is.
It comes from a book that has truly impacted millions globally, a book that explores the very essence of human resilience and purpose. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
A landmark book, absolutely.
Yeah, we're delving into a text that sold, what, over 4 million copies just in English?
Yeah.
Translated into 21 other languages.
Incredible reach. And, Carl Rogers, a giant in psychology himself, called it one of the outstanding contributions to psychological thought in the last 50 years.
Yeah.
It's huge praise.
It really is. And Frankl, well, he wasn't just an observer, was he? He was a psychiatrist who lived through this. He brought this incredibly unique lens to his own horrific experiences as a prisoner in Nazi concentration camps.
Exactly. His background didn't just, inform his perspective. It fundamentally shaped his whole assertion that the will to meaning is the basic motivation for human life. It really reshaped our understanding of humanity, especially in the face of, well, immense suffering. And this book, it isn't just a gripping personal story, though it certainly is that. It tackles a question that, like Frankl himself said, is burning under our fingernails today.
Mm-hmm.
That search for meaning in a world that often feels, well, pretty disoriented.
That phrase, burning under our fingernails, it just captures it perfectly, doesn't it? The deep, persistent ache for purpose.
It does. And it's that very hunger for answers, that search for purpose in a world that often feels chaotic, that our deep dive today really aims to address. We're not just recounting history here. We're trying to give you a kind of shortcut to understanding Frankl's core principles for finding meaning.
Principles forged in the most unimaginable circumstances.
Exactly. Principles forged in the crucible of his own suffering. It's really a testament to how his personal narrative, his experiences in those camps became the undeniable foundation, the existential validation, you could say, for the groundbreaking psychological framework he later called logotherapy. So our mission today is to understand how the human spirit can find purpose, find resilience, even in the absolute worst conditions. This deep dive will dissect the two parts of man's search for meaning. Part 1, his autobiography, his experiences, and Part 2, his theory, logotherapy.
And that intertwining is just so crucial. He actually wrote the book incredibly quickly, didn't he? In just 9 days back in 1942.
9 days. Wow.
Yeah. And initially he wanted to publish it anonymously. His whole purpose, he said, was simply to convey that life holds a potential meaning under any conditions, even the most miserable ones.
So it wasn't about fame or writing a bestseller?
Not at all. He felt this profound, almost ethical responsibility, to share what he'd gone through. He believed it could offer a lifeline to people prone to despair, anyone struggling with that lack of purpose. He just needed to get that truth out there, a truth forged in darkness.
A truth forged in darkness. Okay, with that powerful context, let's plunge into Part 1. Experiences in a concentration camp, the psychological journey. And what's crucial here, as you said, isn't just a grim list of atrocities. Those are sadly well documented. Frankl deliberately offers an inside story, focusing on the cumulative weight, the almost unbearable burden of the multitude of small torments.
Exactly. The daily grind of suffering.
Why was that focus on the small torments, the daily indignities, the constant erosions of dignity, so critical to his analysis, maybe even more revealing than the big headline horrors?
Well, that's where Frankl's trained psychiatric eye really comes in, distinguishing this from just a memoir. He understood that while, yes, the gas chambers, the mass executions were the ultimate horror, it was the relentless, mundane, soul-crushing suffering that systematically broke down the human spirit day by day.
Right.
He was prisoner number 119,104. For most of his time, he wasn't a doctor. He was doing grueling physical labor digging, laying railway tracks. So he was right there, grounded in the common, everyday suffering of the average inmate.
He saw it all.
He meticulously observed that psychological war of attrition. You have to imagine the constant hunger, the biting cold, the random violence, the ever-present filth, not as single events, but as the inescapable fabric of daily life. These small torments, they stripped away layers of identity, of purpose, forcing this brutal reevaluation of what really mattered for survival. It wasn't about heroics. It was about enduring the ordinary horrors of every single moment.
He tells a really stark story about premium coupons. These were worth 50 pfennigs each, apparently exchangeable for 6 cigarettes, or, much more importantly, 12 soups. What did that simple system reveal?
Oh, it's a chilling illustration. It shows just how quickly basic necessities became the ultimate currency, and how even tiny actions revealed the state of someone's spirit, their will to live, Frankl says if you saw a comrade smoking his own cigarettes,
Yeah.
it was a grim sign. It meant they had basically lost the will to live.
Wow. Just from smoking a cigarette.
Because the cigarettes, normally a small luxury, maybe something you'd trade for something else, became a sign of giving up. A final, despairing indulgence before succumbing. Think about it. Trading your last chance at survival, those soup rations, for a fleeting moment of nicotine. It tells you everything about the priorities when life is stripped down to its barest essentials. These details highlight the profound psychological battles happening inside constantly.
So Frankl breaks down the inmates' mental reactions into 3 phases, almost like a psychological map through hell. Let's start with phase 1. Shock and the delusion of reprieve. He talks about the arrival at Auschwitz. 1,500 people crammed 80 to a cattle car for days. Then that sudden terrifying cry, Auschwitz, everyone knew what that name meant.
Gas chambers, crematoriums, instant association. But then this initial false hope kicks in the delusion of reprieve, he calls it.
How did that work?
Well, he describes seeing these apparently well-fed, almost cheerful prisoners. But they were actually a specially chosen elite, the receiving squad. Long-term prisoners who'd adapted, learned languages, developed this grotesque sense of humor. They were even bargaining for smuggled valuables, platinum tie pins, diamonds, in exchange for schnapps.
Unbelievable.
Their appearance, their chillingly detached manner, it created this illusion for the new arrivals that maybe, just maybe, things wouldn't be so utterly horrific. A desperate clinging to normalcy that was shattered almost immediately.
And then came the selection. A single SS officer just casually pointing a finger. Left, death, right, work.
Just a flick of the finger. Frankl describes instinctively straightening up, trying to look fit, capable of labor. It was pure survival instinct.
And the truth came later.
Only later did they learn the horrifying math. 90% of their transport, the sick mothers with children, went straight to the crematoriums, which were horrifyingly disguised as baths. They were even handed a piece of soap. A final, cruel deception.
God. The stripping of possessions and identity followed immediately, right? A deliberate dehumanization.
Absolutely. Imagine being forced to abandon everything you own, every link to your past life. Then stripped naked, every item taken, even wedding rings. Frankl tried to save his manuscript, his life's work, something deeply personal.
What happened?
He describes an older prisoner just laughing cynically, shouting "shit" at his futile attempt. That moment, Frankl says, was the culminating point of his initial psychological reaction. In his words, I struck out my whole former life. A complete severing of identity, forced blank slate.
And what was left? Just nothing now except our bare bodies, even minus hair. All we possessed literally was our naked existence.
Exactly.
Yet even in that absolute void, he notes this grim humor emerging, like being relieved that real water did flow from the sprays in showers, not gas.
Yeah, a defense mechanism. And this strange, cold curiosity, observing their own fate with detachment. He even mentions not catching cold despite being naked in the late autumn chill.
How does that detachment work? What does it tell us about coping with the unthinkable?
It became this necessary protective shield, a kind of mental disassociation. The mind observes the body's suffering almost from a distance, like it's happening to someone else. It's fascinating how he notes the surprising physical endurance. 2 healthy gums with no vitamins or cleaning, sleeping soundly despite chaos, wearing rags for months.
That's where he quotes Dostoevsky, right? Yes, a man can get used to anything, but do not ask us how.
Precisely. The mind adapts to avoid complete breakdown, but the cost is high.
Thoughts of suicide, running into the wire, the electric fence were common.
Almost constant, he says, a mental whisper. But Frankl made an early, conscious decision against it. He saw it as pointless, given how low life expectancy was anyway. Why rush it? Why give the guards that satisfaction?
So survival meant adapting, and a key part of that was looking fit.
Absolutely critical. A colleague's grim advice. Shave daily. Look fit for work. That wasn't vanity, it was life or death. They had a term, Muslim, for those who looked like they'd given up, ill, emaciated, eyes sunken. Those are the ones doomed for the next selection, the gas chambers.
He even mentioned smiling grimly when told he looked like he should fear the next selection.
Yeah, it's that dark humor again. A grim acknowledgement of his own perceived fitness, even on the absolute edge.
This connects back to that Lessing quote. There are things which must cause you to lose your reason or you have none to lose. Frankl wasn't just surviving, he was analyzing. He saw these reactions shock, dehumanization as normal responses to an abnormal situation.
Exactly. He's essentially saying if this didn't shock you, if it didn't strip you down, then maybe something fundamental in your humanity was already missing. It's a crucial insight. It challenges our standard notions of sanity. What's fascinating is how he maps these phases, from that initial shock to the next stage, the deep-seated apathy. He shows us these protective mechanisms, how the psyche numbs itself, but also paradoxically, how the inner life could persist, even deepen sometimes. It really makes you question the nature of resilience. Is it about pushing through pain or finding ways to emotionally detach to preserve the self?
Which brings us squarely into phase two, apathy and emotional death. The second phase, it's characterized by this profound emotional blunting, right?
Yes. There's still that deep longing for home, for family, but it's paired with this overwhelming disgust at the physical ugliness, the filth, the latrines, the punishment parades. And very quickly, after just weeks watching horrific events unfold, you just become numb. He describes watching a comrade being brutally beaten and feeling nothing, observing unmoved. The capacity for emotional response just seemed to dry up.
He tells that chilling story from the typhus ward. Watching, totally unconcerned as a dead prisoner's body is stripped of its meager belongings, potatoes, shoes, even a bit of string.
Which was worth more than gold, practically.
Right. And then the body's dragged out, head bumping down the steps, this distinct, awful noise. And Frankel's just sipping his soup, detached, while the dead man stares in from the window.
That insensibility, as he calls it, wasn't a choice. It became a necessary protective shell. The alternative was complete mental collapse. There's just too much horror to constantly feel.
And it wasn't just physical pain. He talks about the mental agony of injustice, like the foreman throwing a stone at him, treating him like an animal just for being slow.
Yeah, and he notes the deeper insult wasn't the stone itself, but having his life, his worth, judged and degraded by this vulgar and brutal man. The affront to his human dignity cut deeper than the physical blow.
Yet even in that bleakness, small connections could make a huge difference. He mentions help from a capo.
Yes, a prisoner put in charge. This couple liked Frankl because Frankl listened to his love stories and offered some psychological advice. Yeah. And because of that connection, Frankl got slightly better positions in the dreaded morning roll calls, avoiding the worst jobs. Sometimes even got a few extra peas in his soup. It sounds small, but these tiny acts of humanity, even from someone in that compromised position, could be life-saving. It shows how fundamental connection remains, even then.
It sounds like a regression to a really primitive state, all focused just on survival.
Pretty much. Preserving one's own life and that of the other fellow. The common sigh of relief at night was just, well, another day is over.
Dreams are just about basic needs. Bread, cake, baths.
Exactly. He mentions how dangerous it was even to talk about food in detail. It stirred up unbearable cravings. Yeah. And the extreme malnutrition basically eliminated the sex drive for most.
A cultural hibernation, he calls it. Intellectual, artistic life just withered.
Largely, yes. But he notes two interesting exceptions. Politics, mostly rumors, which just added to the war of nerves and, perhaps surprisingly, sincere religious interest. Improvised prayers in secret.
So even when everything else is stripped away, people still reach for hope, for something bigger.
It seems so. And that leads to another paradox. This cultural hibernation actually allowed for a kind of spiritual deepening for some. He observed that sensitive people, though often physically weaker, sometimes survived better because they could retreat into their inner riches and spiritual freedom.
That's when he had that profound experience on the march, thinking of his wife.
Yes, a truly pivotal moment for him. Recalling her image, he was hit by this overwhelming realization. Love is the ultimate and the highest goal to which man can aspire. He understood that love goes beyond physical presence, even beyond death itself. Love is as strong as death, he writes. It became an inner sanctuary, a space the guards couldn't touch.
And he found refuge in memories, too, even trivial ones.
Absolutely. Recalling things like bus rides, unlocking his apartment door, mental escape hatches, and finding beauty in unexpected places, a stunning sunset over the desolate camp, the mountains in the distance. He quotes a fellow prisoner looking at a sunset and saying, how beautiful the world could be, even there. Those moments were vital anchors.
Humor, too. Another of the soul's weapons. He actually trained a friend to invent funny future scenarios.
Yeah, like imagining themselves back in normal life but acting out camp behaviors. A surgeon shouting action, action in the OR, or begging a dinner hostess for soup from the bottom of the pot. It's that ability to detach, to find absurdity even in horror that offered a moment's transcendence.
It also throws the relativity of suffering into sharp focus, doesn't it? The dance of joy about going to Dachau instead of Mauthausen because Dachau supposedly had no gas chambers.
Exactly. Or envying common convicts for having toothbrushes and mattresses. The baseline for bearable just shifted so drastically. What seems horrific to us became, for them, a lesser hell.
But the cost was immense. Losing dignity, becoming a number, a plaything of circumstance. The rule was just, do not be conspicuous. Blend in, disappear into the crowd.
Hide in the middle to avoid the blows. Yet, paradoxically, alongside that urge to disappear, there was this intense craving for solitude, for privacy, almost impossible to find.
He found moments near corpses.
Yes, grim as it sounds. Or hiding those men in the water shaft right before liberation, sitting on the lid, acting nonchalant as a guard walked past, defiantly reclaiming a tiny sliver of personal space and agency.
The disregard for individual life sounds shocking. Lists being more important than people, trading prison numbers.
Unimaginable choices. And Frankl made his own profound choice, deciding not to escape when he had a chance, choosing to stay with his dying typhus patients. He said that decision gave him an inward peace that I had never experienced before. Responsibility, even then.
He even made a sort of will to his friend Otto, asking him to tell his wife how much he loved her, how their short marriage outweighed everything.
It connects to that chilling death in Tehran anecdote he mentions, the idea of fate versus human decision. It underscores the uncertainty, the feeling that maybe things are predetermined anyway. But even so, your inner response, your choice of attitude, remained.
And then the end draws near. Liberation. But first, a false dawn.
Right. The Red Cross arrives, there's joy, cigarettes are distributed, relief seems imminent. But that very night, the SS forces another evacuation, marching prisoners away.
But Frankl and his friends stayed behind.
They made a deliberate, desperate choice. Intentionally missed the transports, planning to get on the last truck, which miraculously never came. They woke up instead to the sounds of battle and a white flag flying over the camp gate. Freedom.
But the irony.
The terrible irony, which he only found out weeks later, was that those prisoners who were taken on those trucks, believing they were finally going to freedom, were actually taken to another camp and burned to death in locked huts.
My God, even liberation was fraught with peril.
It's a shattering illustration of the uncertainty, the cruelty that persisted right to the very end. And it raises that crucial question you mentioned earlier. How do we support people after extreme trauma? Re-entry isn't simple. Frankl saw firsthand the deep disillusionment, the psychological bends that could follow that seemingly triumphant moment.
A decompression sickness of the soul that really captures it. So if liberation itself held such dangers, what was the antidote Frankl developed? How did he move from witnessing all this to building a therapy? That brings us right into part 2. Logotherapy in a nutshell.
Exactly. His life's work, really, born from those experiences. Logotherapy, often called the Third Viennese School of Psychotherapy, following Freud and Adler.
Logos. That's Greek for meaning, right? So meaning therapy.
Precisely. And its core concept, Frankl's revolutionary contribution, is the will to meaning. He argued this is man's primary driving force, not the pleasure principle like Freud suggested, or the will to power like Adler. For Frankl, the search for meaning isn't secondary, it's fundamental, a deep-seated human need for purpose.
So what does this all mean for us, today? His personal nightmare birthed this idea that our greatest power isn't escaping suffering, but choosing our attitude towards it, finding purpose, even when everything seems lost.
And it's not just a nice idea. There's evidence. That French poll finding 89% of people need something to live for and 61% would die for it. Or the Johns Hopkins study, where 78% of students put finding purpose and meaning above making money. It resonates because it taps into something deeply human.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, logotherapy is a real shift, isn't it? It's not just about treating symptoms or digging into the past.
Right. It addresses that fundamental human question of meaning, right here, right now, and looking forward. It suggests that the emptiness, the vacuum many people feel, isn't always a pathology in itself. Sometimes it's a call to re-engage, to find responsibility, to discover purpose.
And when that will to meaning is blocked.
That's what he called existential frustration. And this, he argued, can lead to mutagenic neuroses problems stemming from this existential void, not just from psychological conflicts or childhood issues.
He gives that great example of the American diplomat, deeply frustrated with his job, foreign policy. His psychoanalyst blamed it on hating his father, seeing superiors as father images. Classic Freudian take.
Right. But Frankl saw it differently. He recognized the man's real struggle was a frustrated will to meaning. He wasn't living a life aligned with his values. Frankl helped him see that the man changed careers and found lasting contentment. It shows that suffering isn't always bad. Sometimes suffering may well be a human achievement, especially if it comes from wrestling with life's big questions. The therapist's role isn't just to fix problems, but maybe to pilot the patient through his existential crises.
Which leads to new dynamics, this idea of essential tension.
Yeah, Frankl pushed back against the idea that perfect mental health is a tensionless state, pure homeostasis. He argued we need a certain tension, the gap between what one is and what one should become. This striving, this dynamic pull towards a goal isn't a problem. It's indispensable to mental well-being. We need worthwhile goals to struggle for.
Back to Nietzsche. He who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow.
Exactly. And Frankl lived it. Rewriting his manuscript on scraps of paper in the typhus ward, that was his why, keeping him going through the how.
That idea of healthy tension feels really countercultural now, doesn't it? Everyone seems to want comfort, ease.
Very much so. Frankl called the absence of this tension, this purpose, the existential vacuum. He saw it as a kind of mass neurosis of the 20th century, this pervasive feeling of meaninglessness, inner emptiness.
And he thought it came from losing our instincts and traditions.
His theory was twofold. We lost the basic animal instincts that used to guide behavior, so now we have to choose. And second, traditions and values that used to tell us what we ought to do have weakened. So we're left in this void, which leads either to conformism, just doing what everyone else does, or totalitarianism, handing over our freedom to some ideology that tells us what to do and believe.
How does this vacuum show up in people's lives?
All sorts of ways. Boredom, he coined the term Sunday neurosis, that feeling of emptiness when the busy weekends and you're left with yourself. Also depression, aggression, addiction. The statistics he cited even back then were startling. Large percentages of students, alcoholics, drug addicts, were reporting a sense of meaninglessness.
But he didn't see the feeling itself as purely pathological?
No, interestingly, he saw the feeling of meaninglessness as the proof of one's humanness, in a way. It shows we're creatures who crave meaning, but it is potentially pathogenic. It can lead to real problems if it's not addressed.
This ties into suicide prevention, too. He noticed patients often found meaning after a failed attempt, realizing life still expected something from them.
He'd urge them to live to see the day when meaning might appear. Life is always asking something of us, he believed. And he linked aggression to this vacuum, too, citing that experiment where Boy Scouts became less aggressive when they had a shared goal. Purpose channels energy constructively.
And if the will to meaning is frustrated, people compensate.
Often, yes. Compensated by the will to power, chasing money, status, or the will to pleasure, often through sexual compensation, he observed. Logotherapy aims to fill that primary vacuum, guiding people towards their unique purpose.
But the meaning of life isn't some single, universal answer.
No, that's key. It's specific and unique to each person, each situation. Like finding the best move in chess, it totally depends on the game right now. You can't give a general answer.
He flips the question. Ultimately, man should not ask what the meaning of his life is, but rather, he must recognize that it is he who is asked. Life questions us.
Exactly. And we answer by being responsible, living responsibly.
His categorical imperative sounds intense. Live as if you were living already for the second time, and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you were about to act now.
It sounds daunting, but the goal isn't regret. It's to foster this acute sense of immediate responsibility for our choices right now. What will you choose this time?
So the logotherapist isn't painting a picture for the patient.
No, more like an eye specialist, widening the patient's visual field so they can discover the meaning that's already out there, waiting to be found. It's about self-transcendence, looking beyond yourself. Meaning is found in the world, in causes, in loving others. Self-actualization is just a side effect of that outward focus.
Okay, so how do we find this meaning? He lays out three main pathways, right? Three avenues for self-transcendence.
Yes. The first is maybe the most straightforward. Creating a work or doing a deed. Achievement, contribution, making something, doing something useful.
Makes sense? What's the second?
The second is experiencing something or encountering someone. This includes appreciating goodness, truth, beauty like those sunsets in the camp. But most profoundly, it's found through love.
How did he define the meaning of love?
He said, love is the only way to grasp another human being in the innermost core of his personality. Through love, you see not just who the person is, but their potential, what they could become. And love helps them actualize that potential. For Frankl, Love was primary, fundamental. Sex was its expression, not the other way around, challenging theories that reduce love to just sublimated drives. It's about deeply seeing and affirming another's unique value.
Okay, work deeds and love experience. What's the third avenue? This feels like the core, given his background.
It is. The third avenue is the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. When you can't change a situation like being in a concentration camp or facing an incurable illness, you still have the freedom to choose your attitude. This is about transforming a personal tragedy into a triumph.
He tells that incredibly moving story about the elderly doctor grieving his wife.
Yes, the general practitioner, inconsolable after his wife died. Frankl didn't offer platitudes. He asked the doctor, what would have happened if you had died first and your wife had survived you?
And a doctor said,
He said, oh, for her, this would have been terrible, how she would have suffered. And Frankl replied, you see, doctor, such a suffering has been spared her, and it is you who have spared her this suffering. But now you have to pay for it by surviving and mourning her. Suddenly, the doctor saw his suffering not as pointless agony, but as a meaningful sacrifice made out of love. It gave his grief meaning. It transformed it.
that's profound. But Frankel was clear, this isn't about seeking suffering, right?
Absolutely not. Unnecessary suffering is just masochism. If you can change the situation, you should. Remove the cause. But if suffering is unavoidable, meaning is still possible in spite of it.
Someone else pointed out that our culture makes unavoidable unhappiness worse by making us feel unhappy about being unhappy.
Right, Edith Weishaupt-Jolson made that point. Logotherapy, in contrast, aims to help people almost be proud of suffering, see it as ennobling when faced bravely, transform the burden into an achievement of the human spirit.
And Frankel's own deepest camp experience fits here, losing his manuscript.
Yes, losing his life's work in Auschwitz. Devastating. But then, that incredible moment finding a single page from a Hebrew prayer book, the Shema Yisrael, in the pocket of a dead inmate's coat. He saw this coincidence as a challenge, to live my thoughts instead of merely putting them on paper. His core question shifted then from will we survive to something much deeper. Has all this suffering, this dying around us, a meaning?
That shift in questioning seems key to applying logotherapy. People come with these big existential questions now, not just neuroses.
Exactly, and often they don't want traditional religious answers. Frankl developed logodrama for this. He describes using it with a mother grieving one son while caring for another who was severely disabled.
How did that work?
He had her imagine herself on her deathbed looking back. From that perspective, she realized her life had been deeply meaningful, precisely because of the self-sacrificing care she gave her disabled son, making his life fuller, richer. It showed her that a seemingly limited life could be incredibly meaningful, perhaps more so than a long life devoid of such purpose. Quality over quantity.
He also used that analogy of the ape in the lab.
Right, the ape being experimented on can't possibly grasp the meaning of its suffering for science. That leads to the idea of a super meaning, a potential ultimate meaning of human suffering that might exist in a realm beyond our comprehension. Logos is deeper than logic, he'd say.
And he wasn't afraid to use religious belief therapeutically.
If it helped the patient find meaning within their own framework, yes. Not imposing it, but working with it. Like the rabbi who lost his family, Frankl helped him see his survival and suffering not as a cruel joke, but potentially as a path to purification, making him worthy to rejoin his children in heaven. That framing offered the rabbi immense relief.
This idea of meaning ties into how he viewed life's end, its transitoriness.
Yes, he had a unique take. He argued the only things that are truly transitory are potentialities what might happen. Once something is actualized, a deed done, love experienced, suffering endured bravely, it's rescued and preserved in the past. It becomes a permanent part of reality. Having been, he said, is the surest kind of being. What you've lived through and done can't be taken away.
He used that calendar analogy. The pessimist sees the pages dwindling.
But the activist, Frankl said, jots down notes on the back of each torn-off page. Deeds done, joys experienced, suffering overcome. They look back proudly on the harvest of their lives, the full granaries of the past. From this perspective, old age isn't just decline, it's the accumulation of realities. Young people, with only possibilities, should almost envy the elderly, their concrete achievements and experiences. It's a powerful reframing of aging.
Logotherapy isn't just philosophy, though. It has specific techniques. Paradoxical intention sounds intriguing.
It's based on two observations. First, that fear brings about that which one is afraid of, like anxiety making you tremble more. And second, that hyperintention makes impossible what one forcibly wishes, like Trying too hard to fall asleep makes you more awake.
So you intend the thing you fear.
Exactly. Often with humor and detachment, you break the cycle of anxious anticipation.
The examples are almost funny. The doctor, afraid of sweating, is told to try and pour at least 10 quarts.
Yes. Or the bookkeeper with writer's cramp told to deliberately try and scrawl as badly as possible. The stutterer who couldn't stutter when he tried to show the doctor. Even washing compulsions treated by joking about needing to get dirtier, or insomnia by trying to stay awake. It short-circuits the anxiety loop.
And the other technique, dereflection.
That tackles hyper-reflection, being overly focused on yourself and your symptoms. Dereflection redirects your attention outward, towards the world, towards others, towards meaning.
Like the woman whose frigidity resolved when she stopped focusing on her own performance and focused on her partner instead.
Precisely. Orgasm then happened naturally as a side effect. For Frankl, the cue to cure is self-transcendence. Get out of your own head, engage with the world and its demands, meaning pulls you outward.
Frankl also strongly rejected pandeterminism, didn't he? The idea that we're just products of our biology and environment.
Fiercely. He called that nothing butness man is nothing but. He argued it fosters neurotic fatalism, the feeling that we're just puppets. Frankl insisted we are not free from conditions. Biology, psychology, sociology all play a role, but we are always free to take a stand toward the conditions.
Even the worst imaginable conditions.
As a survivor of 4 camps, he testified to that human capacity to defy and brave even the worst conditions conceivable. Your attitude remained your last freedom.
And people are ultimately unpredictable.
Ultimately self-determining, he said. He tells that incredible story of Dr. J, the mass murderer of Steinhoff, a notoriously sadistic SS guard. After the war, in a Soviet POW camp, this same man apparently became the best comrade, secretly sharing his last crust of the bread. It shows people can change radically at any moment, for better or worse.
Which means freedom comes with
responsibility, huge responsibility. Freedom, he said, is only part of the story and half of the truth. It degenerates into mere arbitrariness unless it is lived in terms of responsibleness. That's why he famously suggested the U.S. should erect a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast to complement the Statue of Liberty on the East.
a powerful image. He really pushed for more humanized psychiatry, didn't he? Beyond just mechanisms and techniques.
Absolutely. His psychiatric credo was that even an incurably psychotic person retains human dignity, still has potential for meaning in their unique way. And he directly challenged Freud's idea that extreme conditions blur differences. Frankl saw the opposite in the camps. People became more different. People unmasked themselves, both the swine and the saints.
He mentions Father Maximilian Kolbe as a saint.
Yes, the priest who volunteered to die in place of another prisoner. A profound example of self-transcendence. Frankl ends this part with that stark warning, connecting the past to the future. Since Auschwitz, we know what man is capable of, and since Hiroshima, we know what is at stake. The stakes, he's reminding us, are our very humanity.
A heavy thought. Okay, let's shift to the final phase, he observed. The psychology of liberation itself, re-entry into the world. It wasn't simple joy, was it?
Not at all. He describes the initial shock of freedom. After years of constant tension, there was this total relaxation, but paradoxically, no immediate happiness. Freedom had been dreamed of for so long it had lost its meaning. Its reality just didn't penetrate their consciousness immediately. It felt unreal, like a dream, depersonalization.
They had to relearn how to feel pleasure.
Slowly, painfully. He recalls the very first spark of joy wasn't some grand moment, but seeing a simple, multicolored rooster. Small things brought feeling back, gradually. The body, though, was less inhibited ravenous eating, talking nonstop for hours, releasing years of pent-up pressure.
He uses that analogy of the bends for deep-sea divers. Sudden release from pressure can be dangerous.
Exactly. Liberated prisoners needed careful psychological or spiritual decompression. The sudden shift could be perilous.
One danger was moral deformity.
Yes. Some prisoners, particularly those he called primitive types, suddenly freed from all constraints, become oppressors themselves. They used their freedom licentiously and ruthlessly, mimicking the very brutality they'd suffered.
He tells that story of his friend dragging him through crops.
Yeah, right after liberation. The friend justifies it, saying, "My wife and child have been gassed, and you would forbid me to tread on a few stalks of oats." Frankl had to stress urgently that no one has the right to do wrong, not even if wrong has been done to them. Justice, not vengeance, was crucial for true healing.
Another reaction was bitterness.
Immense bitterness. Returning home, survivors often faced not understanding, but maybe just shrugs of the shoulders or empty phrases like, "We suffered too." from people who couldn't possibly grasp the depth of their experience. They felt betrayed, wondering why they'd endured everything if the world outside hadn't changed or didn't seem to care.
And finally, disillusionment.
The harsh realization that suffering has no limits. The person whose memory kept them alive in the camp, a spouse, a child might be gone. The dream of homecoming, ringing their own doorbell, shattered against the reality of an empty house, a devastating loss. Many found that incredibly hard to overcome. A second wave of suffering, really.
But despite all that, he talks about a crowning experience eventually.
Yes, for the homecoming man. The eventual ability to look back on the camps as nothing but a nightmare, coupled with this wonderful feeling that after all he has suffered, there's nothing he need fear anymore except his God. It suggests a profound transformation is possible where enduring the worst strips away all lesser fears.
Which brings us to his final synthesis, the case for a tragic optimism.
Right. And it's crucial to understand this isn't naive optimism. It's optimism in spite of life's tragic triad: pain, guilt, and death. It's grounded in the belief that life remains potentially meaningful under any conditions, because meaning doesn't depend on happy circumstances.
It's about creatively transforming the negative.
Exactly. Turning unavoidable suffering into human achievement. Deriving from guilt the chance to change for the better, like Dr. J. Using life's finite nature, its transitoriness, as an incentive to take responsible action right now.
But happiness itself can't be the goal.
No, it must ensue. It needs a reason. Trying too hard to be happy, hyperintention, actually spoils it, like trying too hard to laugh at a bad joke. Happiness is a byproduct of meaning, not the target.
And having this meaning orientation protects against give-up ideas, that phenomenon seen in camps.
Yes, where people who lost all hope, all sense of meaning, would just physically decline and die, often signaled by smoking that last cigarette. Frankl saw a direct link to modern issues like the no-future mentality or drug use symptoms of that same existential vacuum, that lack of purpose.
He even did that study on unemployment neurosis.
Fascinating study. He found unemployed patients who engaged in meaningful, unpaid volunteer work saw their depression lift, even though their financial situation was the same. It proved, he said, that man does not live by welfare alone. We need purpose.
Conscience guides us towards meaning.
He believes so. It applies this inner hierarchy of values, maybe rooted deep in our biology, pushing us towards what's worthwhile. And he highlights the defiant power of the human spirit, citing Jerry Long, the quadriplegic who said, "I broke my neck, it didn't break me." Believing his handicap would actually enhance his ability to help others, that's attitudinal heroism.
Like the Polish cardiologist's definition of heroism during the war. Not fighting, but facing unavoidable death with dignity.
Exactly. Going your way with dignity. That inner stance, that choice of attitude, was seen as profoundly heroic. More esteemed, Frankl noted from polls, than even great artists or scientists, mastering a hard lot with your head held high.
And this loops back to the value of the aged, the full granaries of the past.
Yes. Older people have actualized potentials, fulfilled meanings, suffered bravely. Those realities are theirs, untouchable. Young people, with only future possibilities, should envy those concrete achievements, not just pity the decline.
So ultimately, life's meaning and human dignity are unconditional.
Absolutely fundamental for Frankl. Life is potentially meaningful, always, and every person's value is unconditional, not based on their current usefulness or achievements. A vital counterpoint to societies obsessed with productivity and a safeguard against dangerous ideas about who deserves to live. Every life holds inherent worth.
He really fights against that learned meaninglessness, the nihilism that says it's all random, pointless.
Logotherapy aims to immunize against that nihilism by constantly revealing the potential for meaning. And he directly refuted Freud's idea that extreme hunger makes everyone the same. Frankl saw the opposite. The camps starkly revealed individuality, both the swine and the saints, like Father Kolbe.
And if decent people are a minority.
That's not a reason for despair, Frankl insisted. It's the very challenge to join the minority and work to make the world better. Embody that defiant human spirit.
Which circles back to his final warning. Since Auschwitz, we know what man is capable of. And since Hiroshima, we know what is at stake. A call to awareness and to choice.
A profound call to awareness of our potential for both darkness and light, and the critical importance of the choices we make every day in defining our humanity.
That's a powerful place to pause, expert. It really underscores the weight of Frankl's message. We've journeyed through his unimaginable experiences, his survival, and the birth of logotherapy, this constant emphasis on meaning, responsibility, and our ultimate freedom to choose our attitude.
Yeah, even when everything else is stripped away.
And while his experiences were extreme, these insights feel so universally applicable, don't they? Choosing our attitude, finding meaning, even in our own struggles, living responsibly.
Absolutely. It's about answering the questions life asks us, by living our own lives responsibly, by taking that stand toward whatever conditions we face. Frankl's suggestion about a statue of responsibility alongside the Statue of Liberty, it really makes you think.
It does, that freedom isn't the whole picture without responsibility.
Exactly. Freedom without responsibility, he worried, just becomes arbitrariness.
So as you, listening, reflect on this deep dive into Frankl's incredible work, maybe consider this. In a world that definitely champions freedom and absolutely promotes the pursuit of happiness, what would it mean for you to consciously embrace your unique responsibility? Not just to others, but to the potential meaning that only your life can fulfill. Even in the small, everyday struggles, what's the why that will allow you to bear almost anyhow?